Okay, so we are here today on 19th of July, hottest day in the history of the world ever. I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about energy prices and the energy price crisis because it's important, we need to know how to fix it, but also I think it's a good opportunity to introduce people to some ideas that they can use to help understand and evaluate what's happening in the economy, and also talk a little bit about the way the media oversimplifies these ideas in a way which is often unhelpful and confusing. Okay, so we all know energy prices have become really, really high. It's causing the consequence that a lot of people in many cases will not be able to heat their homes in this winter, which is a very, very serious problem. Like literally, people will die, people's lives will become very uncomfortable. And how do we fix it? Okay, so the first thing which people need to understand is that not everyone uses the same amount of energy. And the number one thing which affects how much energy you use is how rich you are. So very rich people, they use a lot of energy. You know, if you think of like super rich people, they literally fly around in private jets. You know, this is unbelievably high energy consumption. But they'll have very big houses, which they'll tend to heat in the winter and cool in the summer. And then they maybe will own a lot of cars, and they'll use private cars, and they'll drive them a lot. And they maybe have big cars. They'll have big parties. There's loads and loads of ways in which very wealthy people use a lot of energy, right? That's number one point to make. Number 2 point is there's kind of two separate sort of theories bouncing around about what the cause of the inflation is. And this is with regards to both energy and inflation in general. So people who watch the channel a lot will know that I've been talking about inflation is going to happen for basically since the beginning of the channel, essentially. The very first video on the channel was like, we're printing a load of money, it's going to the rich. After COVID, it's going to cause inflation. And I think this is a big part of the cause of all the inflation we're seeing. But that's not the main narrative in the mainstream media, which is that the inflation in general, but also like specifically with regards to Ukraine, is caused primarily by, specifically with regards to energy, it's caused specifically by the war in Ukraine, right? The war in Ukraine is causing the inflation. And I think it's really, if you think about it, obvious, like as a whole, it should be obvious that that is not the sole cause for the inflation, because things like, for example, London housing and the London rental market are blowing up, right? Like massively, prices going through the roof. That's obviously not to do with the war in Ukraine. But if you talk specifically about energy, you know, Russia not releasing gas reserves to Europe is probably a big part of it, right? So there's two things going on at the same time, which is number one, the rich were given an absolutely ton of money during COVID, and the obvious consequence of that is inflation. But number two, in some specific markets, and energy is the most obvious one of those, there are supply side issues where, for example, Russia is not selling their energy, and that's making energy more expensive. So two things are happening at once, right? Which is the rich are way, way, way richer, so they can pay more money. And energy in particular, the supply, the amount of energy that we actually have access to has been restricted, right? So this is really problematic, right? Because we already know that rich people consume a lot of energy, right? And then we have a situation where the rich have a ton of money and the country as a whole has not much energy, right? So if you know that there's going to be an energy shortage in the UK, this is a global problem, but we're talking about the UK, what would be the ideal way to fix it, the ideal solution? Well, you know, most people don't use like much more energy than they need, right? You know, maybe they need to drive to work, you know, but most obviously they need to heat their homes, you know. And most people don't use that much more energy than that, you know, especially poorer people. They'll be like very, you know, I know growing up, my dad was really on it, like he doesn't want to use any extra energy, right? Because he's trying to save money, right? So most people are just using the energy they need, maybe like a little bit extra in some cases, right? And then the rich are literally flying around in private jets, right? So if you're in a situation where suddenly you don't have enough energy, what do you want? What should you do as a country? What does a sensible country do? Well, a sensible country turns around to the guys flying around in private jets and says, maybe you should stop flying around in private jets. But what we have done is given the rich an enormous pile of money. So, you know, if the rich have just been given hundreds of millions of pounds, or it's hundreds of billions of pounds in the case of this country, are they going to reduce their energy consumption in response to even a doubling in price? Their energy bills are nothing to them. It's meaningless. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of their incomes, right? So we've created a situation where there's not enough energy. The obvious sensible thing we should do, which is encourage the rich, or perhaps even force the rich to use less energy, is the exact opposite of what we've done. What we've done is encourage the rich to use more energy by giving them a ton of money. So what that means is the people who have to respond to the energy shortage are the people who don't have money, which is the poor. And that is literally not heating your homes, right? So the way we're dealing with it, from a perspective of just like, do you want people in the country to have like good quality livable lives, is ridiculous, right? We've dealt with it in such a way that we're encouraging the rich to fly their private jets more because we're giving them a ton of money, and we're encouraging the poor to like freeze their families in the winter. It's the exact opposite of what we should be doing, right? It's ridiculous, right? And then now, let's look at what is like the most commonly proposed solution, right? The most commonly proposed solution is to do something to directly reduce the cost of energy, right? And you can see the logic in that, right? It's like the price of energy has gone up, so we need to bring the price of energy down. So what can we do to bring the price of energy down? And that is like totally, you can see the logic in it, but it's actually not a great idea, and I'll explain why, okay? So there's this concept in economics, some people will have heard of it, some people would have not have heard of it, called a universal basic income. And universal basic income is basically the idea that the government should give everyone a certain amount of money every month, every year, and everyone should get it. It should be like totally unconditional. Everybody should get that money. And you know, the idea behind it is, you know, this gives everyone the basic ability to live like a basic quality of life, right? And we'll probably discuss this in more detail in another video. But the reason I want to bring it up at this point is a universal basic income gives everybody in the country the same amount of money, okay? And it's an interesting thing, when the government starts giving out money, it's interesting to compare it to a universal basic income, because then we can see who's winning, who's losing. You know, if everybody gets the same, then it's kind of equal, right? So we can say, is this policy better or worse than a universal basic income, or people call it UBI, in terms of inequality and distribution? So if a policy gives more to the rich, it's worse than a UBI from the perspective of inequality. And if a policy gives more to the poor or to ordinary people and less to the rich, it's better than a UBI. Does that make sense to you? So if we look at a policy which reduces energy prices, is that better or worse than a UBI? Well, we know rich people use more energy. So if we bring energy prices down, you benefit exactly proportionally to how much energy you use, right? Like if you normally spend £1,000 on energy a year and we bring the energy price down 10%, you save £100. If you're super rich and you've got 10 private jets and you normally spend 100 grand on energy, then you're going to save 10 grand, right? So bringing energy prices down actually helps the rich much more than the poor in terms of the actual amount of money they save, right? So say we bring in a UBI that's going to cost, we reduce energy bills in such that it costs the government £20 billion. Well, that money will go more to the rich than it would to the poor. And you'd actually give the people who needed the money more money if you just gave them a flat amount of money. But also, if you reduce energy bills, you encourage people to use more energy because you make energy cheaper in a situation where there's not enough energy to go around. So actually, like, this policy, which seems initially like the most sensible policy, which is energy bills have gone up, let's bring energy bills down, is actually really bad from a distributional perspective. It's worse than just giving out money. And also really bad from a saving energy perspective. It's encouraging people to use more energy. So it's a horrible policy. It seems like a good policy, but it's a horrible policy, right? And I think what you actually want from a policy, if you know that the rich are getting really richer and the poor are really struggling and we don't have enough energy, what you want from a policy is a policy that discourages usage of energy from everyone, but particularly from the rich, because they are the people who are using the most wasteful energy, and one that distributes income away from the rich, because they're making a fortune when people are struggling, and towards the people that need it, right? So what you actually want to do, the perfect policy, is actually really the exact opposite policy of what we're doing, right? What you want to do is you want to put a tax on energy consumption, and then you want to use that money to support the poor. Because what that will do is bring energy price up, and that will discourage energy usage from everyone, which is good, but it will also funnel money away from the high energy users, which is the rich, to the low energy users, which is ordinary people and poor families, which means that even though their energy bill has gone up, they will get more from this tax, because we know that they use less than the average amount of energy, right? And it's interesting because it's counterintuitive, right? Like ordinary people will be like, you need to bring the bills down, you need to bring the bills down. But what ordinary people need is not necessarily cheaper energy bills. It's more money. They need more money. You know, and then some poorer people might be able to economize on their energy usage if they had more money in other ways. You know what I mean? And then that would be good for society as a whole. But the policy what we have at the moment is actively funneling money to the rich and encouraging the rich to use more energy at the time when the rich have a ton of money, the poor are really struggling, and we're using too much energy. So I think this is sort of a good example of how the economics media, which I spoke about in other videos, a very simplistic approach to things. And I think the key thing is never takes a distributional approach. And I think this idea, which I've introduced here in this video, compare it to a UBI, compare it to universal basic income, is a really interesting way to really assess whether a policy is good or not. Because if a policy benefits the rich more than the poor, then why not just give money equally? It would be better and it's easier. You know, it's easier, it's cheaper, it's direct money into my bank account. You know what I mean? Like, would you rather, as a poor family, would you rather have your energy bills reduced in a way that saves you £200 a year, or would you rather have £1,000 in your bank account every year? You see what I'm saying? And this is what, if we actually start looking at policies from a distributional perspective and saying, look, who are we really helping here? Then we'll bring in policies which actually help ordinary families. And you know, we have this problem, structural problem in our politics and our media, which is increasingly our politics is dominated by very, very, very wealthy people. Our media is owned and dominated by very, very, very wealthy people. So then they, behind the scenes, are promoting policies that help them, and they're telling you that it's good for you. And the way which you can defend yourself from that is this simple trick, which is, look at the policy, is it better than UBI? And it's also relevant with regards to the Conservative leadership elections, right? Because all of these guys are promising tax cuts, right? And this is in a context where they have cut income tax and raised national insurance, which is a really interesting, like a trick to do, because people don't like income tax, but people don't understand national insurance. And when you understand that income tax is paid on all income and national insurance is paid only on worked income, you can see that what they've done is they've cut taxes on billionaires and raised taxes on you, because your money all comes from your working and their money comes from wealth, right? And if you were to just say, okay, well, would it be better just to give money out equally? Then you'll see, okay, all of these policies are continually designed to funnel money to the rich. So whenever they suggest a policy like they're suggesting now, which is cut taxes, well, who benefits most from cutting taxes? Generally, richer people. So look at their policies and say, look, are these policies designed to benefit ordinary families, or are they designed to benefit the rich? And understand that they have incentives to try and convince you that policies which are good for the rich are actually good for you. So compare it to a basic, simple policy and say, who benefits the most? And in this case, when it comes to energy prices, cutting energy prices directly actually benefits the rich most. Whereas there are other alternative options, such as taxes on energy, where the money is given directly back to ordinary families, that will benefit you more, that will transfer money from the rich to the poor and to ordinary families, and will actually reduce energy consumption. And this is not a complicated policy, but unfortunately, you know, we have a media which is in very many cases, not great quality and is not giving good information. So yeah, I think that's the message I want to leave is, I think this is one quick trick to analyze a policy suggestion. Who benefits the most in terms of cash? Who benefits the most in terms of cash? Is it you? Is it your family? Is it ordinary families in ordinary financial situations? Or is it the rich? And directly reducing energy bills benefits the rich the most. And cutting taxes benefits the rich the most. Whereas putting taxes on energy consumption and giving that money back to everyone equally would benefit you, would benefit ordinary families, and ordinary families would benefit more from it. So, yeah, hopefully this gives people a way to sort of understand better how we can fix our problems. And I think the key takeaway message is just whenever you hear any policy suggested by government, any government, but perhaps especially this Conservative government, which has a lot of very, very wealthy people in it, look at it explicitly from the perspective of distribution. Who wins the most? Is it the rich or is it ordinary families? And if it's the rich, ask yourself, why is that the policy they've chosen? Okay, that's it. I hope everyone enjoyed the Heatwave. This will probably come out a few weeks after it. But we've got to go inside because I'm sweating my arse off. So it's intentionally designed, national insurance, so that very rich people
pay a very low percent. There is one other thing they can do with that massive amount of income. They can buy your mum's house.